Hi everybody, this is the beginning of chapter 3, which is radian measure. And if you turn to page 94 in the book, you can see this information, but you definitely want the title and the date written down, and then you can kind of put your pencil down. I'll tell you when you want to jot more down. Okay, so what we're looking at here is radian measure. It's another way of talking about angles. It is another unit. So for example, and again, you don't have to write this part down, when we are talking about 12 inches, you can say that that equals 1 foot. If you're talking about 1 degree, you can say that it equals 60 minutes. When you are talking about 1 yard, you can say that that equals 3 feet. These are all equivalent measures, and they all measure the same amount, the same measurement amount. We can do the same thing with radians. When you're talking about this theoretical work in math, we start working with this new measurement type called radians, and it's just a way to measure an angle. This is also on page 94. You can kind of read through it if you want. But the bottom line here is that when you are talking about these measurements, we saw that you can graph an angle like so, and this would be 360 degrees. In radians, the equivalent angle measurement of that rotation of one circle is 2 pi. Okay, so this is what you'd want to write down in your notes. 360 degrees is equal to 2 pi in radians. Now, this perfectly fine measurement is usable. However, what the book does is it reduces it. So rather than work with this 360 equal to 2 pi, what the book does is it splits it in half so that this is then reduced. So this is called a conversion when you're converting from one unit to the other. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do just like the book does, and I'm going to divide it in half. Now, the book actually multiplies by half, same thing. So this is reducing it. And what I'm doing is I'm taking the 360 and I'm dividing it by 2. That's 180 degrees. And 2 pi divided by 2 is simply pi. So these are the conversions that we're going to be working with. These are the equivalent ideas. 180 degrees, which is actually half of a circle here, is equal to pi radians. And that's the conversion that we're going to be using. Again, these are both true. 360 degrees does equal 2 pi. However, that can be reduced. That's what the book is doing here on page 94. Dividing it by 2. 360 divided by 2 is 180, which is half of the circle. And 2 pi divided by 2 is pi, which is half of the circle. So this one right here, the one that I marked, is the conversion that we'll be using when we're going between degree measure and radian measure. Again, it's just another name for an angle. So let's look at a couple examples. We're going to be converting from degrees to radians, and we're going to start with 108 degrees. So the thing that you need to remember, and again, pause is needed, is that 180 degrees equals pi in radians. So these are the two numbers that we're always going to be using when we're converting back and forth between degrees and radians. It'll be 180 or it will be pi. So let's take a look at this first example. I have 108 degrees that I want to get rid of, and I want to change it into its equivalent in radians. So I'm going to go over to degrees because that's what I'm trying to get rid of, 180, and I'm going to put that number at the bottom. 180 always matches up with pi in radians. Okay, now watch what happens. These degrees actually just cross out. They divide out. So I'm just looking at numbers here. And if you have a hard time viewing these as a whole number times a fraction, then just make it into a fraction. Okay, 108 times pi is 108 pi. You are not going to put pi into your calculator today. 1 times 180 is 180. The last thing that I need to do here is I need to reduce this fraction. And in order to do this, I'm going to make my life much easier by using the calculator. You could do this longhand. It would take you a little while. You have to come up with common factors. So I'm just simply going to type it into the calculator. 108 divided by 180. Notice I'm not putting pi in today. Hit enter. It's 0.6. That's great, but I want my answer to be a fraction. So what I'm going to do is find the math key. Here's the math key. If you press that, you'll see that there's a whole bunch of different options here. Fraction, decimal, cube, cube root, etc. Well, I want fraction. I'm trying to turn that 0.6 back into a fraction. So I'm going to hit math. I'm going to press enter. Notice I'm going to take my answer, change it back to a fraction. Yes, that's what I want to do, so I'm going to hit enter, and it works out to be 3/5. So this would be 3/5. Now I need to decide what to do with this pi. So you have a couple of different options here. So these are my options. You don't have to write this every time. I'm just showing you for the example here. You could certainly write it as 3/5 and then put the pi right next to it. That would be perfectly fine. You could also write it as 3/5 and put the pi at the top. That's usually what the book does, 3/5. What you can't do is write the 3/5 and put that pi at the bottom. The reason for that is look at where pi is sitting. Pi is in the numerator. That means it's just pi, or pi over 1. So you cannot put it down at the bottom. That would be the only no. So your choice, you can either put the pi next to it or right with the 3, it's your choice. I'm just going to do what I believe the book does, and they do like 3/3, and this would be radians. This next one is a negative. That doesn't mean that you have to add anything to it. You don't have to add 360 or anything. Okay, so we're going to set it up the same way. We're going to start by making that parenthesis. And we're trying to get rid of degrees. So if you look up here, 180 degrees equals pi. We're always going to use that same conversion. So I'm trying to get rid of degrees, so that means I'm going to put 180 degrees at the bottom. That means my degrees will cross out. That's what I'm trying to do. 180, according to what we wrote here, equals pi radians. If it helps you to view this as a fraction, you can certainly make this negative 135/1. I'm doing that small so that you know it wasn't originally like that. And now I'm going to multiply. So negative 135 times pi is negative 135 pi. 1 times 180, of course, is 180. So that's it. Now I just need to reduce. So I'm not going to push that pi into the calculator, though. Negative 135 divided by 180. Remember, you hit enter. Oh, this is 3/4, 75 cents. So I'm going to hit math, enter, enter. Remember, that turns it back to a fraction. So it'd be negative 3/4. And again, it's your choice where you want to put the pi. You can either put it with the 3 or right next to it. Just don't put it in the denominator. So I'm just going to kind of put it right there next to it. And this would be radians. The last two examples, we're going to go in the opposite direction. So we're going to start with these radians, and we're going to end up with the degrees. So let's look at the last two. So we're still going to start out with the same idea, 108, and again, pause and copy as needed. 180 degrees equals pi radians. So I'm going to start out by doing the same thing. I'm going to make a parenthesis. Now remember, this is really radians. How do you know it's radians? Well, first of all, it says radians to degrees, but also, do you see how this has a pi in it and there's no little degree symbol? So this tells you that this is technically radians. Okay, even though it's not labeled as such, it's radians. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of radians. Radians is represented by this pi. So pi is 180 degrees. So notice how this time I'm putting it the opposite. So this time I'm putting the pi at the bottom, so those pi's can divide out. Okay, so I'm going to have to multiply 11 times 180, and my answer is going to have pi on it. Do not type pi into your calculator today. So we're doing 11 times 180, and you see that it's 1,980. So again, 11 times 180, and then there's the pi. 12 times pi, 12 pi. This time the radians cross out, and you're going to be left with this degree here. So technically that's degrees. We're going to have degrees on the answer. Pi's will divide out. Look at them. Pi divided by pi, those divide out, and you're left with 1,980 divided by 12. So it's 165 degrees. Okay, one last example. You've got negative 7 pi over 6. And again, you're not worried about adding or subtracting anything today. Today we're just converting. So I'm going to start by making my parentheses. This is originally radians. I can tell because there's no degree symbol. It's got a pi in it. And I'm trying to get rid of radians. So pi, which is 3.14, pi is going to go at the bottom. I'm pairing that with its equivalent in degrees, which is 180 degrees. Okay, let's go ahead and multiply on the top, multiply on the bottom, numerator, denominator. The negative only goes with one number or the other, not with both. So I'm going to multiply negative 7 times 180. By the way, my answer is going to have pi in it. Don't forget pi there. Negative 7 times 180. So I'm going to use the calculator for that. You can see that that's negative 1,260. And in the denominator, 6 times pi. This negative went with the 7. Don't use it again for the 6. So it just goes with one number or the other, not both. 6 times pi is 6 pi. Just like the one above, the pi's are going to divide out, and you're going to be left with the negative 1,260 divided by 6, which ends up equaling negative 210. I didn't mean to click that twice. Negative 210. And again, this was degrees, which technically carries over to here. And so this would be negative 210 degrees. So that's the basics on converting. You're just going between degrees and this new measurement known as radians. This is the assignment problem set for this notes. Have a great day.